Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a pretty fascinating plunge into the world of flat Earth beliefs.
Yeah, it's quite a topic.
Our source material is mainly from a really interesting conversation with Michael Marshall of the Good Thinking Society. That was on Scientific American's Science Talk podcast.
Good source. Marshall knows his stuff on this.
Absolutely. And our mission really is simple but intriguing to understand what flat earthers actually believe, the reasons behind it all,
hmm
and also how this viewpoint kind of fits into that broader picture of, well, anti-science thinking and conspiracy theories.
Right. It's not always just about the shape of the Earth.
Exactly. So think of this as your shortcut, really, to grasping this captivating phenomenon without getting totally buried in information. Okay, let's unpack this.
Well, what's fascinating right off the bat is how different the reality of these beliefs is from, the image most of us probably have.
Right. You likely picture that simple disk, yeah?
Yeah.
Arctic in the middle.
Antarctica is an ice wall around the edge.
Yeah.
That one.
Yeah, that's the classic mental picture. But it turns out that's not the only model they have. Not by a long shot.
No. So you've got the disk model, sure, Arctic center, continents spread out, that Antarctic edge.
Okay.
But then there's this other concept, the infinite plane.
Infinite.
Yeah. Same Arctic center, same continents, but instead of an edge, Antarctica just keeps going forever
Yeah.
in all directions, just endless ice.
Wow. Okay, that really makes you stop and think an infinite ice plane.
It does. And this difference, it wasn't just some minor detail. It actually led to, well, early arguments and even splits within the movement.
Really? Like actual factions?
Kind of, yeah. You
Yeah.
had people really committed to the disk model arguing pretty fiercely with those who were convinced by the infinite plane idea.
Huh. And I heard something else too, beyond just the shape debates. Wasn't there another kind of split, like genuine believers versus people maybe just arguing for fun?
Exactly that.
Hmm.
Strange wrinkle. You had the actual believers, but then you also had this group who seemed to be arguing for flat Earth almost like an intellectual game. You know, playing devil's advocate, maybe just trolling online forums.
Just for kicks.
Sort of seemed that way. But here's the really interesting part. Those unconventional, sometimes pretty outlandish arguments from the troll side, they actually ended up converting some people.
No way. How?
Well, by maybe winning these weird esoteric debates, they unintentionally convinced some undecided folks that there must be something to it, pulled them into the genuinely believing camp.
That's a really strange dynamic, isn't it? Unexpected influence.
It really is.
Okay, so one of the biggest hurdles for any flat Earth model, I'd imagine, is gravity. I mean, you don't have a big spherical thing pulling everything towards the center. So how did they explain that feeling of being pulled down?
Ah, right. This is where it gets, well, really creative, shall we say. Some proponents argue that what we experience as gravity, things accelerating down at 9.8 meters per second squared, isn't things falling down at all.
It isn't. Then what is it?
It's the ground itself accelerating upwards to meet the object.
The ground is moving up, so when I drop my keys...
The Earth is rushing up to catch them, yeah.
Okay, that's quite a perspective shift. But hang on. If the ground has been accelerating upwards constantly, like since forever, wouldn't it eventually hit the speed of light, which is supposed to be impossible, right?
That's the obvious scientific objection, yeah.
Yeah.
And the, let's say, more scientifically minded flat earthers, they actually have a counter for this. They bring in Einstein.
Relativity. That.
They argue that as this upward acceleration gets really, really close to the speed of light, time itself starts to slow down time dilation. So theoretically, it never actually reaches light speed because time stretches out infinitely.
Wow. Okay. That's complex.
It is. And, while that might have impressed some people in early online debates, it wasn't exactly the kind of simple, snappy idea that goes viral easily.
Right. Which kind of leads us to the modern boom, doesn't it? Because before, say, 2015, this was still pretty niche, wasn't it? Like you said, people often thought it was just a joke.
That's right. It was fringe. You might hear about it, but it wasn't a widespread thing people took seriously.
Yeah.
But then, 2015, 2016, something definitely shifted. And a huge part of that was YouTube.
YouTube. Okay. How so?
2 video series in particular really seemed to kick things off. One was by Eric Dubay called 200 Proofs Earth is Not a Spinning Globe.
200 proofs. That sounds comprehensive.
Well, the number's impressive, but the proofs themselves, maybe less so. They weren't really complex scientific arguments, mostly just really basic observations.
Like what?
Like, the horizon looks flat to the naked eye, or water always finds its own level, doesn't curve, stuff like that.
Okay, simple observations.
Exactly. But here's the thing. Dubé mixed these seemingly simple points with, well, outright conspiracy theories. It was a real scattergun approach.
Conspiracy theories, like what? Give me an example.
Okay, so like proof number 199, I think it was, basically said that because historical figures like Isaac Newton, Neil Armstrong, and Galileo were supposedly Freemasons, the Earth must be flat.
Wait, what? How does that connect?
The connection is tenuous at best. It's pure conspiracy logic, linking Freemasonry to a global cover-up about the Earth's shape.
So it's a real mix of like pseudophysics and just general conspiratorial thinking.
Precisely. And it seemed designed to appeal to lots of different people who might already distrust science or, the government or established institution.
Right, so you might hook in someone who just trusts their own eyes or someone already deep into other conspiracies.
Or even, and this is important, fundamentalist Christians who take the Bible, especially Genesis, very literally. Creationism is often deeply tied into flat Earth beliefs for many people.
Okay, and how did these videos spread so much? Was it just people searching for flat Earth?
Actually, no. That's not what the research suggests. Most people who now identify as flat earthers seem to have encountered it first via YouTube's Up Next recommendations.
The algorithm.
Exactly. Initially, it seems the algorithm lumped flat Earth videos in with things like moon landing denial videos, sensational title stuff that got a lot of clicks and watch time, even if people were watching out of disbelief.
So you watch a video doubting the moon landing, and bam, YouTube suggests 200 proofs the Earth is flat.
Something like that, yeah. And the more people clicked, even just out of curiosity, the more the algorithm promoted it. It became a sort of feedback loop.
Like an unintentional incubator for the idea.
That's a pretty good way to put it, yeah.
Okay, so when you actually try to show scientific evidence, like, pictures of the Earth from space, how do flat earthers react to that?
The photos. Yeah, deep distrust is the main reaction.
They just say they're fake.
Pretty much. The common arguments are that they're composite images, heavily photoshopped, or just complete hoaxes created by NASA.
But aren't some space images actually composites, like stitched together from multiple shots?
Well, yes, in a technical sense. NASA is open about that for certain types of images, like generating a full cloudless view. But flat earthers seize on that admission.
How?
They ignore the crucial next step. Even if an image is a composite, it's a composite of something. It's stitched together from actual photographs taken from space. They use the composite label to try and dismiss the entire thing.
Got it. So it's twisting a technical detail. And this distrust of NASA seems really central, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely core. For many, NASA isn't just, mistaken. It's deliberately evil. It's a tool of the government or the Illuminati, the New World Order. Some even say it's a tool of Satan.
Wow. That's
Right, that's a deeply ingrained anti-establishment conspiratorial view, and it leads to some really convoluted arguments to support their ideas.
Like what?
Okay, take the United Nations logo.
The UN logo, the blue one with the map.
That's the one. Flat earthers often point to it as proof. See, they say it shows the continents arranged around the North Pole on a flat plane, just like their model.
Right. Their argument being, why would this global organization use a flat map logo if the world was a globe?
Exactly.
Right.
And when you push back, like, okay, what would a better logo be? A globe view would hide half the world. They often pivot.
Pivot how?
They'll point out that Antarctica isn't on the UN logo.
And why is that significant to them?
Well, their explanation ties right back to their models. Antarctica's missing either because it's the giant ice wall around the edge of the disk, or maybe it's part of the dome structure.
And the simple explanation that Antarctica isn't a nation and the UN is the United Nations.
That tends to get dismissed. The need to find evidence for their belief, even in a logo, seems to override the more straightforward explanation. It really shows that confirmation bias in action, doesn't it?
Yeah, strongly. Seeking out anything that seems to fit, dismissing anything that doesn't, no matter how obvious. Okay, so what about the rest of the universe in their view? Are the other planets flat too? What's out there?
Again, you get a lot of variation here. It's not monolithic. Some flat earthers actually do accept this sort of standard model of the universe beyond Earth. Planets are spheres, space is vast. That's a minority view, though, it seems.
Or commonly.
More commonly, you find beliefs in a much smaller, much closer sun and moon, like just hovering above the flat disk.
Right. And then there's the dome idea, the firmament.
Yes, the firmament. That's a big one for many. especially those coming from a literal biblical interpretation, a solid dome or barrier enclosing the entire flat Earth system, like a snow globe,
The
basically.
snow globe Earth. And didn't you mention something about Wernher von Braun's gravestone being used as evidence for this dome? That
Yeah,
sounds like a stretch.
it is quite the interpretation, yeah. His gravestone includes a Bible verse, Psalms 19.1. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament sheweth his handiwork.
Okay.
Some flat earthers take this firmament mention as von Braun, a key NASA figure, making a kind of secret deathbed confession that there is a literal dome, acknowledging the biblical roof over the world.
Instead of the more obvious interpretation that, reaching the heavens via rockets shows God's handiwork in creation.
Exactly. The more straightforward reading connects it to his life's work in space exploration. But again, confirmation bias leads to the dome interpretation.
And Mark Sargent, one of the YouTube guys you mentioned, he had specific ideas about the sun and moon being closer, right? And having different kinds of light.
That's right. Sargent was a big proponent of the closer sun and moon idea, and he argued they had fundamentally different lights. Sunlight was warm, but moonlight was actually cold.
Moonlight is cold. How did he figure that?
Well, it's easily debunked, of course. You can measure it. The temperature drop at night is just the lack of sun, not some intrinsic coldness from the moon. But it fit his narrative.
And Sargent's own journey is interesting, isn't it? He came to flat Earth from other conspiracy theories.
Yes, exactly. He talked about believing in the JFK assassination conspiracy, the moon landing hoax, even the face on Mars. For him, flat Earth wasn't just another theory, it became the key.
The key.
He called it the Rosetta Stone of conspiracies. The one idea that, if true, would explain why all the other cover-ups, like the moon landing, were necessary. It supposedly unified everything.
That's a powerful framing for someone already inclined to believe in conspiracies. So it's really not just about geography or astronomy for many of these folks.
Not at all. It's deeply tied into a whole network of other ideas.
You see that connection explicitly.
Absolutely. Go to a flat Earth convention, for example. You'll find stalls or speakers promoting completely unrelated conspiracy theories.
Like what kind of things?
All sorts. From, relatively niche ones like dinosaurs being fake,
Dinosaurs were faked, okay.
all the way to promoting really dangerous, hateful stuff, like the anti-Semitic forgery, the protocols of the Elders of Zion.
Wow. Okay, that's disturbing. It really shows it's part of a much wider mindset.
It absolutely does. You see this clustering effect. People who believe the Earth is flat are often also strongly anti-vaccination.
Right. Distrust of big pharma, mainstream medicine.
Exactly. Marshall, in the interview we're drawing from, mentioned a specific case of a flat earther he knew who also believed in and promoted urine therapy
Urine therapy. For what?
as a cure for serious diseases, including HIV/AIDS.
Oh, wow. Okay, so flat Earth, which might seem kind of quirky or harmless on the surface.
Might actually be just the most visible part of a whole ecosystem of beliefs, some of which are genuinely harmful and dangerous.
Right. Which explains why just throwing scientific facts about the Earth's shape at someone might not work.
Exactly. If your belief is embedded in this whole web of distrust and conspiracy, just tackling the shape issue isn't enough. You have to understand the wider pattern of thinking.
It makes you wonder, though, going back to the upward acceleration idea. Wouldn't we feel that? Like, wouldn't the G-force constantly increase? How do they account for the steady feeling of gravity we experience?
That's another tricky point they often have less developed answers for. Or they might revert back to the relativity argument about time dilation, somehow canceling it out. Though the physics doesn't really support that constant feeling. It highlights the internal inconsistencies they often have to navigate.
This has been really, really insightful. So just to kind of wrap up the key things we've touched on,
Sure.
it seems the flat Earth movement isn't just one thing. There are different models, different reasons people believe.
Definitely diverse.
Yeah.
Not monolithic at all.
And its modern growth spurt is heavily linked to online platforms, especially YouTube and its algorithms.
Yeah, the internet has been crucial.
A huge part of it is rejecting mainstream science, not just disagreeing with it, but seeing it as part of a massive conspiracy, often involving NASA.
That anti-establishment conspiratorial element is key.
And maybe most importantly, the flat Earth belief rarely exists in isolation. It's often tangled up with a whole bunch of other anti-science views, conspiracy theories, some of which can be genuinely harmful.
Exactly. It's part of a larger pattern.
So maybe a final thought for you listening. Just consider that very human tendency we all have,
Hmm.
that desire for simple answers, explanations that cover everything.
Mm-hmm. And our tendency towards confirmation bias, wanting to believe things that fit what we already think.
Right. How might those basic human psychological traits play into the appeal of ideas like flat Earth, even when they seem outlandish from the outside?
Yeah, thinking about those patterns, maybe in ourselves too, could be a really useful tool for navigating this incredibly complex, sometimes confusing information world we're all living in.